Let's start with something uncomfortable. If a military platform is still flying after 70 years, your first instinct is probably this: it must be outdated, it must be inefficient, and it's only still around because replacing it is inconvenient. That instinct feels reasonable, and it's wrong, because if newer systems are faster, stealthier, and more precise, why do so many of them disappear quietly after 1 or 2 decades while the B-52 just stays? Not upgraded once or twice, but repeatedly reused, repurposed, and kept operational in wars that look nothing like the one it was designed for. So let's ask the question people usually avoid. What if the problem isn't that the B-52 is old? What if the problem is that we've been using the wrong standard to decide what should survive in modern warfare? Because when people talk about modernization, they usually mean better technology, faster sensors, smarter weapons, more advanced designs. But that assumes something very specific. It assumes that progress replaces systems the same way innovation replaces products. And war does not work that way. So before we talk about why the B-52 refuses to retire, we need to pause on a more uncomfortable idea. What if longevity in military systems has almost nothing to do with being modern, and everything to do with what kind of problem the system was built to absorb? Because once you see that difference, the B-52 stops looking like an exception. It starts looking like a pattern. So if age isn't the real issue, and technology alone doesn't explain survival, then what actually decides when a military system becomes obsolete? Because if we're honest, most platforms don't disappear the moment something better appears. They disappear when the environment changes in a way they can no longer absorb. This is where most conversations about obsolescence go wrong. People look at surface traits, speed, stealth, electronics, sensors. These are visible, they change fast, they are easy to compare. But obsolescence doesn't begin when technology advances. It begins when a system can no longer absorb change. Most platforms don't fail because they are outdated. They fail because they were optimized too tightly, built to win a specific kind of war, in a specific phase of history, under a specific set of assumptions. When those assumptions collapse, the platform collapses with them. The B-52 never tied itself to those assumptions. And that difference matters more than it sounds. Here's where the logic usually breaks. When people say a platform is outdated, they assume it failed to keep up with progress. But what if it's not failing to keep up? What if it was never designed to chase progress in the first place? Many modern platforms are designed as answers. An answer to radar, an answer to interception, an answer to reaction time, an answer to adversary capability. They are built to be correct. The B-52 was built to be available. It did not promise penetration by speed. It did not promise survival through invisibility. It did not promise dominance through precision. What it promised was simpler and harder. If mass was needed, it would carry it. If endurance was needed, it would stay. If reach was needed, it would get there. Availability sounds unsophisticated. It isn't. Availability is one of the hardest engineering states to preserve over decades, because availability means tolerating change without collapsing. Systems built to be correct age quickly. Systems built to be available age differently. This creates a strange imbalance. Systems built for peak performance feel dominant early. They look decisive, they look modern, they look untouchable. But the moment conditions drift, that dominance starts to decay. So the real question becomes uncomfortable. Is performance what keeps a system alive, or is it what quietly shortens its lifespan? Performance peaks early, flexibility accumulates. The B-52 was never pushed to the edge of its design envelope. It was not asked to survive by geometry. It was not asked to operate alone. It was not asked to win by being faster than the threat. It was asked to carry, to endure, and to integrate. Bombs changed, missions changed, command structures changed, even the definition of a strike changed. The platform did not resist those changes. It absorbed them. And once you understand that, longevity stops looking accidental. At this point, it's tempting to treat the B-52 as a special case, a historical outlier, a survivor that somehow slipped through. But that explanation falls apart very quickly. Because we've seen the opposite happen. Platforms that arrived as breakthroughs looked unstoppable in their moment, and then quietly faded. Think of systems like the F-117, not because it failed, but because it was built around a problem that stopped being stable. Once you notice that pattern, the B-52 no longer looks exceptional. It looks predictable. Survival stops looking like luck. It starts looking like structure. Here is another reason the B-52 endured that rarely gets discussed. It never became the center of the system. Many platforms die because they become indispensable. They turn into doctrinal anchors. Everything is built around them. Every limitation becomes strategic. Once a system becomes central, every weakness scales upward. Every upgrade becomes political. Every failure becomes unacceptable. The B-52 never carried that burden. It was always part of a larger structure, never the structure itself. That meant it could be supplemented, worked around, retasked, without forcing the entire system to adapt around it. Paradoxically, that made it harder to replace. Replacing something central is urgent. Replacing something quietly useful is optional. Optional systems tend to live longer. Once you see that, longevity starts to follow logic, not nostalgia. Most discussions of modern warfare focus on moments of contact, detection, engagement, strike. But systems don't age in combat, they age in structure, maintenance cycles, training pipelines, supply stability, upgrade rhythm. This is where longevity is decided. The B-52 exists in a part of the system where logistics matter more than spectacle. It does not demand extreme readiness. It does not force constant redesign. It does not require the ecosystem to chase it. Instead, it adapts to what the ecosystem already supports. That makes it unglamorous. And unglamorous systems are durable. Most systems don't die in combat. They die when the structure around them can no longer support them. People often talk about retirement as if it were a decision. It isn't. Retirement happens when replacement becomes easier, and replacing the B-52 doesn't mean replacing an airframe. It means replacing a role cluster. Endurance, payload diversity, integration tolerance, operational predictability. It also means replacing habits, planning reflexes, training rhythms, maintenance expectations. Most new platforms promise superiority. Very few promise continuity, and continuity is what long-lived systems actually provide. Until something can replace continuity without breaking the structure around it, retirement remains theoretical. At this point, the B-52 is no longer a bomber in the traditional sense. It is an interface, a stable, predictable node that allows changing tools to attach without destabilizing the structure around it. That's why it can carry weapons that didn't exist when it was designed. That's why it can be tasked in roles that were never envisioned. And that's why its age has become almost irrelevant. It isn't surviving despite being old. It's surviving because it was never defined by being new. Once you see the platform this way, the conversation changes. The question is no longer how long it can keep flying. The question becomes what would break if it disappeared. The B-52 is not unique. Across military history, the systems that live the longest are rarely the most advanced at birth. They are the ones that sit at stable layers of the architecture, layers that change slowly, layers that connect many things, layers that tolerate uncertainty. These systems rarely dominate headlines. They dominate calendars. They remain year after year, not because they are perfect, but because removing them creates more disruption than keeping them. Longevity, in this sense, is not about survival, it's about friction. We tend to believe progress replaces the old with the new. In reality, progress replaces rigidity with adaptability. Systems defined by performance age quickly. Systems defined by function age slowly. The B-52 refuses to retire, not because it cannot be replaced, but because what it provides is not easily isolated as a single capability. It provides stability inside a system that keeps changing. And in modern warfare, longevity is rarely a reward for being better. It is a consequence of being harder to replace without breaking the system itself.